Democrats on the House Intel Committee say there are more questions to be answered and more witnesses to be interviewed in their Russia investigation, but Republicans say they're wrapping up the probe. Joining us now is House Intel Committee, the ranking Democrat, Congressman Adam Schiff of California. If it's supposed to be over, what work is there left for you to do, sir?
Well, probably the most important work after the Republicans put out their report and we put out ours, we're going to seek the release of the entire transcripts of all the witness interviews. The Republicans have said from the beginning that they're committed to doing this. And if we can't come together on a unified report, the next best thing, frankly, is giving the American people all the facts. But I have to tell you, Chris, I'm skeptical they're going to keep their word on this. Because when you read these transcripts, you not only will learn a host of facts that the Republicans won't include in their report, don't want the people to see, but you also see how fundamentally unserious the Republicans were about this investigation, how unserious many of their questions were, how superficial those questions were, and how all too often they came to the defense of witnesses when they refused to answer questions. But the American people should see what's being done in their name and, importantly, what was not done in their name.
Look, we always appreciate the transparency. We were just talking about that with Josh Dawsey of the Washington Post in this audio recording of Trump talking to donors. It's just better for people to decide. But why is the reason? Because it is getting difficult for people to trust anything that's partisan. So the question that comes up is, why would you even want to continue that House Intel probe when it had become so dysfunctional, so toxically partisan that there was literally a wall? You know, we talk about the joke of who's going to build the wall. You guys built one between the two sides of your own committee. Where was there going to be progress in that probe?
Well, Chris, there wasn't a wall built in the committee. That was evidently something that the chairman was proposing to do, which I think was abandoned. But it's a perfect indication, symbolically and otherwise, right, of the difficulty, frankly, we've had with our chairman. It's been less a problem, I think, among most of the other members of the committee, but the leadership of the committee comes from the top. And from the very beginning of the investigation, indeed the day after that open hearing with James Comey, when the chairman went on that midnight run, his objective has been to protect the White House, not to do a credible investigation. Even so, Chris, we've learned a great deal. We've learned a great deal about secret meetings the Trump campaign had with the Russians. We've learned a great deal about the Russians' use of social media. And we have been able to obtain a lot of very important information for the country, which you'll see when these transcripts come out, because at least some of the members, the Democratic members, have been very serious about this. And the other reason, Chris, is we can't simply rely on Bob Mueller, because his job is different than ours. His job is to determine who broke the law and who should be prosecuted and who should go to jail. It's not his job to tell the country what happened. And outside of an indictment, he may not be able to speak. That's what the Congress is supposed to do. So there's no substitute for Congress doing its job.
Yeah, well, fair point about purview. And as we understand it, the only responsibility of the special counsel is to report to AG Rosenstein, Deputy AG Rosenstein on the matter, not to the American people. Fair point. However, in terms of what you guys learned, Conaway came out, who was a fairly respected guy on both sides of the aisle, and says no proof of any collusion. No proof even that the Russians had intentions to tilt the playing field toward Trump.
Well, that's at odds with the abundant evidence. And when you read the transcripts, you'll see exactly how wrong those statements are. Indeed, the comments about disputing the intelligence community's assessment that the Russians were trying to help their preferred candidate, Donald Trump, that's contrary to all the evidence we've seen. It's certainly contrary to the evidence Bob Mueller, the allegations in the Bob Mueller indictment of the Russians. It's contrary to what the Senate is seeing on a bipartisan basis. So let's let the country see what's in these transcripts. Let the country judge for themselves. But it shows, I think, just how complete the capitulation has been on the GOP side to the White House, that they would contest even that fundamental conclusion of our intelligence community and all of the evidence in the social media campaign, all of the evidence about the hacking and dumping operation, which very clearly points to the Russian motivation, not only of sowing discord, but of helping one candidate, Donald Trump, and hurting the other, Hillary Clinton.
Now, you've said that you have concerns about the response by the U.S. to what happened with this nerve agent attack in the U.K. on somewhat of the same grounds. We heard from Nikki Haley, the UN ambassador from the U.S., obviously. We heard from former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. We even have a new statement out of the White House, but we haven't heard from the president openly condemning Russia for these alleged actions by dint of what the UK says that they've developed in terms of proof. Why does that bother you?
Well, the Russians violated our sovereignty by interfering in our election. They're violating British sovereignty by attempting to murder people on British soil, and in fact have murdered people on British soil. They are trampling on the rule of law around the world, and we need to stand up to them. And the fact that this president isn't capable of doing that means that the most powerful nation on earth isn't willing to stand up to Russia as it violates international law and commits murder and attempted murder. That's a serious business, and if our British ally can't even count on the President of the United States to have her back when there's an attack on her soil, what does that say about the willingness of the United States to defend our allies? So I think this is a serious problem. It's not enough to have your UN ambassador say something or your press secretary say something. Donald Trump is sending a message to Putin by his silence, and that's got to stop.
You know, it's interesting. The Haley statement detailed different things that Russia is doing. She had an interesting line in there where she said, "We take no pleasure in criticizing Russia, but they keep giving us good reason to do so." She didn't mention Russian interference in our election in that statement, I believe. And connected to that, there are the sanctions. One of the only things that you men and women down there have decided to agree on recently was passing these sanctions against Russia. I think it was, there were only like 2 non-votes on it, right, in terms of the operative vote. They went to the White House. The White House says they did act on it. They're being taken by the Treasury and other actions. What is your understanding of whether those sanctions that you handed to the White House have been acted on?
They've done nothing on them except when the deadline came up to announce the names of people that were being considered for sanctions. They literally tore pages out of Forbes magazine and stapled them to their response. That also sends a message to Russia that the President of the United States is going to do everything he can to protect Putin. What we could do right now in response to this poisoning is speak out strongly on behalf of our British allies, support every action that Britain takes, implement these sanctions that Congress has sent to the president. What better timing could there be than this latest provocation? So the White House has a lot of opportunities if they're serious about confronting this malevolent actor, but clearly they're not. And one of the problems with shutting down our investigation is it prevents us from finding out whether there's a reason why the president can't act against Vladimir Putin.
All right, Congressman Schiff, thank you very much. Appreciate you being on the show this morning, as always.
Thank you.
Allison.